Okay, welcome everyone, students, faculty, and staff to our last science seminar of the semester. If you have attended this or other science seminars this semester and enjoyed them, please provide positive feedback about the ones you thought were the best seminars. It's always a thing that we like to hear and we like to know. If you know anyone else who could be a future seminar speaker, maybe a family member or a family friend, we are always open to suggestions. You can try to put us in contact with that person. Our speaker today is Dr. Gary DeBoer. You may know Dr. DeBoer as the best chemistry teacher ever. That's what it says, guys. It must be true. But did you also know that Dr. DeBoer was a Peace Corps volunteer in the Pacific, worked in the chemical industry making electrochromic devices, has held fellowships with NASA, the Naval Research Laboratory, the Ames Lab, and the U.S. Air Force Research Laboratory. For the last 4 summers, Dr. DeBoer has been awarded a fellowship in the Air Force Research Lab's Technology Transfer Office. This has been the first fellowship the AFRL has ever awarded that was outside of a research lab. The last summer, his work has focused on extraterrestrial IP law, I guess you can kind of see that up there, and the role of technology transfer in support of the U.S. Space Force. Dr. DeBoer also directs the Laterno Ingenuity Center, aka LIC, which acts as the Laterno Technology Transfer Office. So if you think you have an invention that might be patentable, you should talk to this guy. Perhaps you can do that at lunch after the seminar. We'll be meeting in the Joyce Room of the Corner Cafe for those who are interested. And now, Dr. DeBoer will speak on the topic of ETIP, I think the extraterrestrial intellectual property. Let's show a warm welcome for Dr. DeBoer.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Dr. Hamilton. I couldn't have done it better if I had written it myself. So, okay, today we're going to talk about extraterrestrial intellectual property law. Yes? Or the question of who owns the moon? Here we go. All right. Okay. So this work comes out of my work with the Tech Transfer Office at the AFRL. The Air Force Research Lab serves 2 branches of the armed forces, both the U.S. Air Force and the new U.S. Space Force. There we go. All right, so here we go. Let's say you're walking the loop, so to speak, with that nice other person that we know and love. Let's go. Let's do this. This looks better, don't you think? Yeah. That sets the mood, too. So it's late at night, you're walking the loop, and you're getting into those deep conversations, and you're really feeling that connection, and you're thinking, yeah, this is the person. This is the person for me. This is, God brought this person into my life, and this is it. And then suddenly, yeah, like, what happened to the mood? I mean, is nothing sacred in life anymore? I mean, even the moon has now been commercialized. Yes, Coca-Cola sign on the moon there. Okay. Well, who does own the moon? And could this happen? Well, there's this guy here called Dennis Hope. Back in 1980, he said he owned the moon and started selling lots up there. And people like Tom Cruise and Tom Hanks, and I think Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan, they started buying property on the moon. This guy made tens of millions of dollars selling property, issuing deeds, saying that he owned the moon. And other people kind of laughed at the whole thing because they said, yeah. But the Outer Space Treaty that just about every country in the world has signed back in 1967 says that outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, is not subject to national appropriation by claim of sovereignty, by means of use or occupation, or by any other means. And critics have said, this guy has got no legal basis to say that he owns the moon, because according to international treaty, nobody can say that they are sovereign over the moon. Okay? So people kind of dismissed this and thought, well, those guys just wasted their money, and this guy, had a nice scam going there, and so it goes. All right, and many people just dismissed it thereafter. Thought, well, that's a curious little thing that happened in history. Yeah, kind of neat. But now we have the Artemis project. And I suspect many of you watched Artemis 1 launch and go out into space around the moon and back again. And there'll be an Artemis 2 that takes humans out to the moon and back again. There's going to be Artemis 3, which takes humans to the lunar surface and puts up an orbiting space station around the moon. And there's going to be human landing systems going from that orbiting space station down to the lunar surface. And there's plans to build permanent base camps on the moon, to build a infrastructure we call the cislunar space, to build out things so that we can launch from the cislunar space to Mars. And all this is happening now in these next few years, or has already happened with respect to Artemis 1. And so those things that were kind of in the past and possibly, hypothetical are now becoming reality. Yes? Sort of like that song that, David Bowie sang way back when, the Space Oddity. Now those things are becoming a reality. So how do we deal with all this stuff when we think of the hypothetical situations that science fiction has given to us over the years with respect to how things have happened on the moon? Okay? Can we learn from any of those lessons of fiction with respect to the fact of the present? That's the question. Okay, so the cislunar space, what do we mean by cislunar space? What we mean is that space that is swept out by the moon, let's see, there we go, that's swept out by the moon as it goes around the Earth. And that's a lot of space. Yes, it includes low Earth orbit, medium Earth orbit, GEO, geosynchronous Earth orbit. It includes just about everything around the Earth and the moon. So this is a big region of space that we are speaking of when we talk about the cislunar space. And there are plans out to 2060 put out by Homeland Security and the Space Force with respect to how are we going to protect those assets that are out there and things like that. So this is a real thing happening right now, and it's really exciting for people my age who remember the first time we went to the moon when I was a very small boy. So, yeah, this is pretty cool stuff. Okay? Now, let's switch gears a little bit. We were talking about real estate property on the moon, but there's other types of property that we can also talk about with respect to this cislunar space. And those other types of property that I've been working with more recently is intellectual property. And intellectual property, at least for the U.S., has its basis in the U.S. Constitution, where it says in Article 1, Section 8, to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive rights to their respective writings and discoveries. So this little line in the U.S. Constitution has led to what we understand as patent law. Yes? And with respect to IP and patent law, there are three types of patents that we talk about: design, utility, and plant patents. There are things like copyrights that we talk about with respect to intellectual property. We also talk about trademarks, yes, that we talk about. And then there's this other sort of area of intellectual property that is kind of but not really a legal sort of thing, and it's called trade secrets. So trade secrets really don't have any legal protection because they are just a secret. And if you can keep them secret, well, that's good, right? If you can't, well, too bad for you, right? There are some legal documents like non-disclosure agreements and stuff that you can try to use to keep secrets, but there's no legal protection for those secrets themselves. So here we go. We got this idea of patent law, IP law, and what does that have to do with the cislunar space? Well, what exactly is a patent? We're going to focus on the patent part of IP here. And what a patent does is it gives the patent owner the right to exclude others from making, using, offering for sale, or selling the invention throughout the United States, or importing the invention into the United States. So what a patent gives you, it gives you a right to exclude others. So for a time, for the life of that patent, you have the right to exclude others from selling that invention that you made. You sort of have a legal monopoly on it for a short time. Okay? Now note that it says throughout the United States, because each country, each sovereign country, gives the inventor these rights. Yes? The rights come from that sovereign country. All right? Now, along with this right to exclude others, there's a contribution the inventor has to make to society. And we call that a disclosure. And that's also in the law. Here it is, Title 35 U.S.C. 112, where it says, for you to obtain a patent, you need to disclose your invention and the best mode contemplated by the inventor or joint inventors for carrying out that invention. Okay? So after your patent expires, everybody knows how to do this thing, right? You give it over to the public, right? So in exchange for exclusive rights for a short time, you need to make a full disclosure of your invention. So there's a quid pro quo going on here. There's an exchange. You get rights to exclude, but you have to fully disclose. All right. Okay, so that's cool. Now, this is sort of a balancing act then, right, between your public disclosure, where you give away and tell everything about your invention, and the rights to exclude others from using your invention. And, that can be a good balancing sort of thing here, right? And that's worked for a long time to help encourage economic growth and all these other sorts of things. But what happens in space, in that cislunar space where there's no sovereign country, because no country can claim sovereignty to space or the moon, there's no sovereign country that can give you those rights to exclude others. Why would you then apply for a patent for something that will be used or made in space? Because by applying for the patent, you're going to disclose your invention, and you have no rights to exclude others. So this messes up that balancing act that we have with respect to patents, right? If you apply for a patent, you'd fully disclose, but you get no rights. Why would anyone want to do this? This is why we call this the space patent paradox. Because to put space and patent together, it just doesn't work. You can't get a patent in outer space. There's no sovereign country to give you the rights to exclude others. So why would you want to apply for a patent for something made or used in outer space? All right. Okay, do you guys see the problem? Or maybe it's not a problem. Okay, maybe you fell asleep because the lights went down. I wouldn't blame you. All right. Okay, now you might ask yourself, yeah, but Dr. DeBoer, what about these other things where there is no sovereign country and things happen? Places like Antarctica or the deep sea bottom. Yeah. We call these extraterritorial jurisdictions. Okay, and there are international treaties that, apply to IP rights for things that you may discover on Antarctica or the seabed with respect to, biodiversity and things like that you may discover there and then patent and make use of in another country. Or even you can, obtain some of the resources from the seabed, right? And, use those for your own good so long as you pay into the sort of the common good of all countries who altogether, we could say, have a common ownership in that seabed. So there are some of these, extraterritorial examples that we might use to try to think about how we would apply this to extraterrestrial sort of IP agreements. Okay, but they all kind of fall short of what we need to go on here, because nobody is living in large groups in Antarctica, nobody's living in the seabed. And we're proposing that people will be living on the moon, that we'll have colonies there, that there's going to be groups of people there on the moon and eventually on Mars. And it's a little bit of a different situation. Well, what about extraterrestrial agreements with respect to intellectual property? Well, there are a number of those that, number of agreements out there that we talk about, starting from way back in 1967 with the first Outer Space Treaty under Lyndon Johnson there, through a whole bunch of U.S. presidential administrations down all the way through Donald Trump there in 2020. Okay? So let's take a look at some of these extraterrestrial treaties and see what they say with respect to who owns the moon and if they can address this patent, the space patent paradox. So let's begin with the outer space treaties. There's actually 5 of these outer space treaties. The first one is the most well-known one, the Outer Space Treaty of 1967. But there are 4 more. The U.S. has signed off on 4 of the 5. Okay? The last one, the Moon Agreement, which was put out in 1979, when Jimmy Carter was still president. Carter was going to sign this agreement and enter into this agreement, and that was going to carry a lot of other countries with it. But then Carter lost an election to this other guy. What was his name? Yeah, Ronald Reagan. Okay, and Ronald Reagan wanted nothing to do with this Moon Agreement, and so it was never signed by the United States. And because the United States did not sign the Moon Agreement, a lot of other countries didn't either. Okay, all right. So again, the Outer Space Agreement is most famous because it says no country can claim sovereignty to the moon or to space. Okay? And note here it's talking about claiming sovereignty. Right? You can't claim that you can govern the moon. You can't claim that sort of thing. All right. There you go. Now, the Moon Agreement was based on the Outer Space Agreement, but I went a little bit further. The Moon Agreement says that the moon and its natural resources are the common heritage of mankind. And it said any use of the moon has to be beneficial to all of mankind. Okay? And Ronald Reagan didn't like that. Okay. All right. The Moon Agreement actually went on and said more things. Okay. It was it really spelled these things out. It says that that the surface of the moon or the surface underneath it shall not become any property of any state. Okay. That nobody can ever own something in space. So the Moon Agreement speaks directly to ownership by individuals or by states. And it clearly says that no, this cannot happen. Of course, the U.S. has not signed the Moon Agreement, and so it says it doesn't hold because we haven't signed it. Okay? All right. So there you go. Now, what has the U.S. done with respect to laws, with respect to space and intellectual property? Well, probably the most known laws in U.S. books is Title 35 U.S.C. 105 entitled Inventions in Outer Space, which basically says if you invent something in a U.S. registered spacecraft, it's like you invented it as if you were in the U.S. Or if you're using something in a registered spacecraft that's registered to the U.S., it's like you are living in the U.S., as long as you are inside that registered U.S. spacecraft. So, in essence, the United States has extended its territory into outer space, claiming outer space with respect to any volume of space that we take up that's within a registered U.S. space vehicle or spacecraft. Okay? Not only that, we've also said that if we have an international agreement that says that, even if it's an Italian space vehicle, but we have an international agreement that says the Italians recognize the U.S. and so forth and so on, we can claim that as our, extraterrestrial jurisdiction as well with respect to intellectual property. So the U.S. just unilaterally did this. It didn't go through any international challenge or anything else. And now other countries have done similar sort of things, just, extending their territories to outer space within whatever they feel is their registered space vehicles. All right. Okie dokie. All right. Another international agreement that speaks to IP in outer space is the International Space station agreement. Okay? And you saw pictures of that in the video before you came in. Okay? And in Article 21, it speaks to intellectual property. It says, subject to the provisions of this article, for purposes of intellectual property law, an activity occurring in or on a space station flight element shall be deemed to have occurred only in the territory of the partner state of that element's registry. So the trouble with the International Space Station and IP is it doesn't belong to just one country. There's a U.S. module, there's a Russian module, there's a European Space Agency module, there's a Japanese module. I think there's like 7 or 8 different sovereign entities involved with the International Space Station. So what this treaty is saying, hey, if you're in the Italian part of the space station, well, then Italian IP law applies, but not U.S. law, right? If you're in the European Space Agency portion, well, then European IP law applies. Just like as, if they were just different space vehicles just floating around in space, okay? And there's even separate clauses that talk about transporting an equipment through the European Space Agency part to some other part, and if it's not being used during that transport, it's not going to violate any IP laws and so forth and so on. So it gets a little bit complicated there when you have this one big lab up there that's connected to lots of different countries, all claiming sovereignty to the region inside their space vehicles, and therefore saying that their laws apply in those portions of the International Space Station. All right, so that's kind of interesting. There's also, if you read the ISS treaty, it's really interesting. They even have laws about immigration and extradition and things like that in there. So if you commit a crime in the Russian part of the module, you may not get extradited to the other part, right? So, if you do a crime, quick, run. Go over that other part, right? And so just like, anyway, that's just by the way sort of thing. Then there was the Space Act of 2015. This is a really bold move under the Obama administration, and I can understand the purpose of it. This is what it says. This is what the law says, in quotes here. A United States citizen engaged in a commercial recovery of an asteroid resource or a space resource under this chapter shall be entitled to any asteroid resource or space research obtained, including to possess, own, transport, use, and sell the asteroid resource or space resource obtained in accordance with applicable law. Well, you're just making the law here, so it's applicable. That's kind of a funny thing, isn't it? Okay. Including the international obligations of the United States. So what the Obama administration was trying to do is, hey, people want to invest in getting these resources from space. We have to make sure that if they're going to get a return on their investment, so by law we're saying, yes, you can own asteroid resources. Now note here, they're not saying you can own the asteroid, but you can own the what? The resources. Now, of course, if you mine the whole asteroid till there's nothing left, right, you just, own all the resources of the asteroid, right? So, exactly what the difference is there is debatable. So, yeah, this is everybody agreed on this, bipartisan, bicameral, all those by words in there, and this passed the House and the Senate in 2015. Note it talks about ownership. Okay? Why can we put this law? Well, we didn't sign the Moon Agreement that said we couldn't own things. Yes? So we're saying that we do own things. All you got to do is get there and claim it and take it. And it's yours to buy, use, sell, whatever you want to do. All right. So you can own and sell space resources. There's the deal there. Okay. Let's see, we're going to click. All right. Now, you might think that, well, does this mean that you're claiming sovereignty over something if you can say that you own it and can sell it and stuff like that? Well, the law even has in it a little footnote sort of thing at the end that says, well, disclaimer of extraterritorial sovereignty. It says, it is the sense of Congress that by the enactment of this act, the United States does not thereby assert sovereignty or sovereign or exclusive rights or jurisdiction over or the ownership of any celestial body. Okay, because, there's that Outer Space Treaty of 1967 that we signed, right? And we're kind of obliged to keep, that says we cannot claim sovereignty. But it doesn't say anything about claiming ownership, so let's do that. Yes? Mm-hmm. All right. So we're saying in the Space Act of 2015, we're not violating what we said in 1967 when we signed the Outer Space Treaty. We are just, talking about other stuff here. We're talking about ownership. We can own stuff without claiming legal sovereignty or legal jurisdiction over that area of space. All right, so there you go. So the point here is we can own the resource without owning the celestial body, and we can own a resource without claiming sovereignty over the region of space that thing is in. Okay, so 2020. Summit to 2020. And I put here Mike Pence here because he was sort of the champion of all this Artemis stuff there with NASA. And you'd think that the Artemis Treaty, or the Artemis Accords as they are called, would speak to intellectual property because they're all about manufacturing in space and living in space and stuff like that. So you think if there's anything of any of these treaties that would speak specifically to intellectual property, it would be the Artemis Accords. But they don't. Well, they speak to it, but very indirectly. Okay? What they say is that the signatures, bilateral instruments referred to above, are expected to contain other provisions necessary to conduct such cooperation, including those related to liability, intellectual property, and the transfer of goods and technical data. Basically, what it says is we're going to work this stuff out, and our agreement is we're going to work this stuff out. Yes? We don't have an agreement, but we agree to work it out. Yes? All right. Which is a good start. At least we're agreeing to work it out. Yes? Even if we don't have an agreement right now as to what that means. Yes? So, anyway. So, you think that the extraterrestrial agreement that would speak to IP just, deflects it, so to speak, here. Okay? So the takeaway here is IP is something to work on, right? And hopefully we do that work and get this figured out. All right. Then there was a presidential order of 2020 signed by Donald Trump, who was president at the time. Okay? And this is an executive order, so it's not legally binding, so to speak. Okay? But it does give a sense of intention, we could say. Okay? And so part of this presidential order says something like this. Americans should have the right to engage in commercial exploration, recovery, and use of resources in outer space. Consistent with applicable law, outer space is a legally and physically unique domain of human activity. And the United States does not view it as a what? Global commons. Remember what the Moon Agreement said? That outer space belongs to who? To all, right? So this is a direct statement that we do not respect the Moon Agreement. We did not sign it, and we're not going to see outer space as a common good for everybody. We're going to see it as ours to take. Yes? All right. So there we go. So that's the most recent sort of action on the United States with respect to extraterrestrial IP. So these are the things that we have gone through here so far. Okay? From the Outer Space Treaties of 1967 to the Presidential Order of 2020. All right, now, let's sum up what we've done so far here with respect to patent protection in space. So I built a little chart here. Okay? On the left, we have your invention origin. So let's say you invented something on Earth. Where can you get a patent for it? Well, you can get a patent on Earth to protect that invention. You can get a patent that will protect your invention in a registered space object, but you cannot obtain a patent to protect your invention in outer space outside of that registered space object. Likewise, if you invented something on a registered space object, you could also obtain patent protection on Earth or in other registered space objects. Yes, but you can't get patent protection where? In outer space. If you invented something in outer space, You could apply for a patent on Earth and get patent protection on Earth. You'd be floating around out there in space during this time. Yes? Right? And you could get a patent protection in registered space objects, but you could not get patent protection where? In outer space. All right. The other sort of takeaway that we can get from going through these extraterritorial and extraterrestrial agreements is ownership of outer space resources. Okay? If you can get it, you can own it. Basically is what the law is saying now. Okay? Finders keepers. Okay? And you can claim ownership of celestial resources while not claiming sovereignty or ownership of that celestial body. Okay? All right, so those are the two big points of summary here with respect to this. Now, so there's two areas here. There's the IP property, intellectual property, and there's the real estate property. There's an interesting little science fiction book that talks about future scenarios based on what we agree on with respect to IP property and real estate property as we develop the cislunar space. And it's called Artemis. It's written by that same guy who wrote the Martian book. Remember that one? They made a movie out of it. Okay? They'll probably make a movie out of this one too because it's all got lots of action scenes in it. Okay? So if you need a science fiction book to read over the summer, you might check out this one, Artemis by Andy Weir. Okay. Now, as I think about this, and I think about, what's happened in life and in general, and what might happen in outer space in the future, I kind of ask myself, well, what's happened in the past that might be an indication of what we do in the future? And one of the things that I recall because I grew up in the Midwest, oh, that really added a lot of light to the room, didn't it? Okay, look at that, woke you guys up, okay, is what's happened with respect to Native American reservations. So at one time, this was the Sioux Reservation, this whole area here, almost all of western South Dakota, part of North Dakota, off there into Wyoming, and a big chunk of western Nebraska. Yes? And that agreement was made between the United States and the Sioux tribes, and it was supposed to last how long? Well, as long as the sun goes up and the sun goes down and whatever fancy words they put in there. Okay? And if we look at it now, well, how big is the Sioux Reservation? It's that big. Yeah. And if that's our track history with respect to agreements with other peoples, I'm wondering what's our track history going to be with respect to the outer space agreements that we've already made and where we're going to go with them in the future. Okay? All right. So anyway, it's kind of that back to the future sort of idea here. So what can we do, now to change the trajectory for the future? All of us would say, yeah, it's terrible what happened to the Native Americans with respect to taking their land away from them and all these, reneging on treaties and everything else there. Okay? And why did we renege on the treaty with the Sioux, by the way? Anybody know what caused that reneging? Gold. Gold where? In the Black Hills of South Dakota. And suddenly that land was too good for the Native Americans and had to go back to the United States, right? So what's going to happen in space when we find that asteroid that's got a bunch of what? Gold or platinum or titanium. Well, it's going to be too good for everybody else, so it's going to come back to us, right? So what are some options that we can influence this trajectory that we are on of sort of space grabbing everything that we can get our hands on? Yes? Right? Well, there are several options. One option is to do nothing, to leave it as it is, right? And what that is going to lead is you have an IP-free zone. You can't get patents in space, right? And maybe that's the way things should be. Maybe everything should just be open source. Maybe you're that sort of a person, and you think that that's the way it should be. Okay? And maybe you're all for this space grab. Hey, if I can get it, it's mine, right? Why not? Go for it. Okay? Well, if you think that's the way it should be, well, that's what you've got, right? If you think it might be some other way, for whatever internal motivations that you may have to think it should be some other way, okay, you might think, well, maybe we can make some international space territory, right? Yes? If no one country can claim sovereignty to regions in outer space, maybe we can have an international group that can claim sovereignty and kind of run space internationally rather than from one country at a time. Okay? And there are international treaties with respect to IP that are in place. And one idea is to use what we call the Patent Cooperation Treaty as a model to extend this to an international space territory so that you can apply for an international patent and that patent can extend into this international space territory. Okay? And we would need to have a local office, okay, to manage that international space territory. And since nobody's living on the moon or Mars right now, it probably had to be, managed by some international organization such as the WIPO, which is part of the UN there. So that's one sort of proposal to change the trajectory that we are currently on. Okay. Third sort of extension to number 3 is to have the local office become a lunar or Mars territory and actually have the people of Mars and the moon administrate these local offices. And that would probably be an eventuality of number 2. So many people are proposing this as a direction that we should go, yes, to have IP laws that we think have been beneficial to us within our territorial jurisdictions into space. All right, so that's pretty cool, I think. I think those are some good proposals there. So what do we take away from this? Okay. Well, as Christians, I think we have to apply some more reasoning to this. We call ourselves the CPU, right? The Christian Polytechnic University. Yes? So as a university, we think of things not just with respect to science and engineering. We think of things not just with respect to the economics of development, but we should think of things with respect to how does our ethics, our morality, the laws that sort of reflect on our ethics and morality, how do they reflect on those values that we have as Christians? Yeah. What would be a Christian value that could be imposed upon this whole question of extraterrestrial IP? And, something that pops into my head is Psalm 19, and probably many of you know it. Here's the first few lines. It says something like, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands." Okay. So if you're in intellectual property law, you know that claiming is important. Yes? And we can say here that in Psalm 19, that is likewise in Genesis 1, God claims his own work here. Okay? He is claiming what he has done as his sovereign sort of thing. There are some Christians who say that IP law itself is just an accommodation to a fallen world. Right? If it hadn't fallen, right, if we were all still living in the garden, we wouldn't need any IP law. But I'm not quite so sure about that, because in Revelations it says we're going to be living in a new city, not a garden anymore. Yes, and cities are going to have buildings and lakes and stuff like that. And there's going to be, engineering and all kinds of stuff going on with that. So I don't necessarily think that IP law is only applicable to a fallen world. I think it also reflects on a redeemed world. Yes? Okay, there's some other verses in Psalm 19 that I think kind of speak to this. Okay, Psalm 19 goes on and says, "The law of the Lord is perfect, refreshing the soul. The statutes of the Lord are trustworthy, making wise the simple." Okay. Now, as people made in the image of God, we are sort of co-creators. We talk about that a lot with respect to our creativity, our inventiveness, our ingenuity. Okay? That like God, we're able to make things that are new. We're creative creatures, yes? But we also make laws as people, right? And I think as Christians, we want to have our laws reflect as much as we can the nature of God in those laws. They may not be perfect as God's laws are, but we want to make them more perfect. Just like we want a more perfect union, we want to make our laws extend in that trajectory which become more perfect. Yes? We want our laws and our statutes, our rules for conducting ourselves to best represent how God would want us to be conducting ourselves with respect to how we deal with things in outer space as well as things on earth. And then there's this sort of prayer at the end of Psalm 19, which I think we all, in whatever work we are doing, we all want to pray the same prayer, in that we want to say that, may these words of my mouth and this meditation of my heart be pleasing in your sight, Lord, my rock and my redeemer. In the end, we want to be able to face our Creator, face our Lord, and say, hey, the work I did on earth, whether it was, building something, or building laws, or building regulations, or building social policy, okay? It's my hope that these ideas are going to be pleasing to you, my God, okay? So that's sort of a challenge that I put out there to you, okay? This is not just all about technology. This is not just all about economics. This is not just all about this or that, but this is about who we are as people. This is about who we are as Christians and what we want to do in the end with respect to how we are going to be seen by others, but also by God himself. All right. Okay. Let's see. Is this going to click? It's not going to click. Ah, there we go. So to conclude these, some points of conclusion here. Okay. Here we go. One, we can say that IP exclusion rights in outer space does not currently exist. Okay. We can conclude that. We can conclude that the U.S. and other countries create their own laws with respect to ownership of resources in outer space. Okay. Everybody's making them up themselves. There's no agreement on what these ownership laws should be. Everybody just decides what they're going to be based on their own self-interest. You can say both 1 and 2 are problematic for the positive development of outer space. And I'm not just the only one who says this. Lots of other people say, who aren't necessarily coming from a Christian perspective on these things. Just about everybody from an economic perspective or from a space perspective is saying, hey, we got a problem in outer space. Okay? Houston, we got a problem, you might say. All right. We can say that both 1 and 2 require international cooperation to be addressed effectively. If you have every country making their own laws in outer space, it's going to be a mess. Right? So this has to be done on a global scale because space is something that we all enjoy, something that we all share in common. Okay? And we can also say that now is the time to do these things, because if we wait 10, 20, 30 years, we're going to be waking up from a nightmare. I think it's better to go into something with your eyes open than to go into it asleep and have to be woke up later on. Yes? All right. Okay, now, before we go into questions and answers here, there's one more thing I want to say, and that is that there's this riveted literary magazine that the university puts out, yes? And there was a while back where they sent out this email to, I don't know, maybe everybody, maybe you got to, calling for contributions. So I was working on this stuff at the time, and I was inspired, and I wrote up this little haiku. So here it is. I wrote this haiku. Who owns lesser light? None. One. All lunarians. Artemis Assus. Okay. And I was pretty proud of that. I thought, that's a pretty cool little haiku there. Expresses a lot of the things that we're talking about here, I think. And I sent it off to the editors of this riveted magazine. And then I was crushed because I was rejected. Mm-hmm. But I can fix this. Right? And I can publish it before they publish theirs because I just did. And so with that little coup of mine here, I'll open this up to any questions that you have from the audience. Let me turn up the lights so that we can better serve those questions. Ooh, that woke you up, yeah? All right, questions from the audience, any of these? We've got a few minutes for questions. Yes, in front.
I still don't entirely understand why this is necessary. Like, in what scenario is someone going to be outside of a spacecraft and building something which somebody has patented?
Well, there's a couple of things you can say about that. One, we can ask, why is IP law necessary at all? And why do we have IP law in this country in the first place? Yes? I'll get to your part. Go away. Okay? Just hang with me for a minute. Okay? Many people say we shouldn't have any IP law. We should have everything open sourced. Right? Why give these big companies a monopoly for a time? Yes? Right? I guess the answer to that is a couple of them. One, we can say from a utilitarian approach that if you want to have investors to invest in invention, those investors need to have some hope of a return on that investment. Yes? And if it's all open source and anybody can copy what they're doing, they have no guarantee of return on their investment. Okay? And so that's from a purely pragmatic, utilitarian approach. You can also approach it from a more personal value sort of approach, saying, hey, if Hidalgo invents something, we should be able to say that's Hidalgo's invention. Yes? Yeah. Right? And Hamilton shouldn't be able to steal it and claim it as his own. Right? No, he wouldn't want to do that, right? Okay. So there's lots of reasons just within terrestrial limits. Okay? Now, if you think in outer space, the investment there is going to be even greater. Right? And if we don't have some international agreements about things, it's going to be a mess. Right? Who's claiming what everywhere? Yes? And I'm not the only one who's saying this is going to be problematic, right? So unless we get some sort of census of agreement with respect to how we're developing space, we're talking about developing space, not just exploring it. We're talking about development. We're talking about residents. We're talking about habitats. We're talking about, obtaining resources. Unless we have some stronger international agreements, it's going to be, it's going to lead to conflict. And conflict in space is going to fall down that gravity well, right? And become conflict on Earth. So from a space security perspective, right? The Space Force, Homeland Security, they're all very concerned with the direction of international agreements in extraterrestrial space. I don't know if that helped at all. Did that help at all?
But if you made a habitat, wouldn't that be a
Space vehicle?
yeah.
Okay, so then you've got 100 space vehicles all passing through the same space, all with different laws in them. Is that okay? I don't think it's going to be workable.
But I mean,
right?
it's like here.
Yeah, I mean that's the way it is now, right? But then what about outside of space? What about a private company? Right? Are they going to then register their space vehicle with whichever country that is going to give them the most rights? Because every country now just determines whatever rights they are. Yes? And that's what leads to all sorts of strange things happening here.
Don't we already have that though on Earth?
No, No, you don't have
Well-
quite the same thing on Earth.
Because I mean,
right?
like, if somebody invented something, say in America,
Mhm.
the patent laws only apply to America. So if somebody wanted to go and copy their stuff in another country, they could copy it, they just couldn't sell it in America.
Yeah, that's quite right.
And wouldn't it be basically the same in space?
But you can patent things in other countries. You can
Yeah.
apply for an international
Yeah.
patent for France, or you have that choice.
Mhm.
In space, you don't have that choice.
But if
Let's take another question, and you can come and talk to me more at lunch, because other people have some other things they may want to ask about. Yes.
I don't know, maybe this is the same question, but I was asking if you say I invent like a moon rover
Mhm.
and it's on the moon,
Mhm.
couldn't I register that as a U.S. space object, and now that's like that? My
Well-
invention is the space object. Would that be like a loophole?
I guess that's the current way we're doing it, right? But then on the moon highway, you're gonna have all the moon vehicles registered to different countries, all traveling on the same moon road. Yes? I mean, how would that look in Texas? If you lived in Texas, but you decide, well, I'm gonna register my vehicle to Oklahoma because it doesn't take an annual inspection, right? Yes? And now all the vehicles on the Texas highways are from all kinds of different states. But with who knows what inspections or laws or with respect to insurance or anything else. I mean, anybody seen a problem there? I think there's gonna be a problem there, and other people do too. Yes, Mr. Baker.
Quick question on definition.
Mhm.
Depending on how people define the word space habitat, could someone define their spacesuit as the space habitat?
I suspect there will be people who do that, and they will say that this spacesuit is a registered space vehicle, right? Yes? But then if you're doing something outside that spacesuit, then it's in outer space, right? And so, how far do you extend these things, right? It just, I mean, you can see, just asking these questions, how problematic this is gonna become, right? Yes?
So, the solution to give authority to the UN is assuming that the UN technically does not count as a sovereign body, which
Well,
is,
You could count as a sovereign international body.
however, not all countries are in the UN. So that would technically still be violating the original treaty. saying
Well,
we're
the
not
original
giving
treaty says
sovereignty.
no nation
But it's
can claim
the
sovereignty.
United Nations, which technically is just a bunch of nations turned into one nation
Well,
because
you can
not
debate
all
the
nations
language
in the
there. And that's-
country
I'm just saying that that's been proposed, right?
yes.
As a way to get around it. Maybe it's not a good proposal, maybe it's a problematic one. In
Well,
that case, what would we do then?
Because again, people only follow laws so long as they're enforced or they have incentive to follow laws, unless they're
Right.
Christian or have like morals to do it, which the reason there's an issue
Yeah.
in
Yeah,
general
so
is
then there's
because
a
people
whole
are
question of IP
following
enforcement
morals.
involved.
And
yeah.
normally with the UN, people don't. For instance, like in Chad, once the UN got involved, it made the Civil War worse.
Yeah, well, with respect to international IP, there are enforcement tools.
There are to a certain degree, but I still feel like it would be violating the original treaty.
Okay, all right. Okay, well, it looks like we're running out of time, and you guys need to get to other places. If you want to continue this discussion, I'll be here for a while, and we'll also be going for lunch, and I can see you in the Joyce Room or the corner cafe.